Hello there again, and welcome back to AGRC 213, Computers and Technology in Agriculture. We're getting started on what is the hardest component of the course, and that is Microsoft Access. And I want to provide you with a couple of tips here before we get into going through some of the content that I want to talk about in this particular video. First thing, if you're using Office 365, on occasion, Access doesn't come as a piece of that package. So you'll have to be seeking out what computer machine that you can get to that has Access on it. Of course, all of ours on campus have that already available, or check your computer and what system that you're running to see if you can get to Access. Either way, it will be your responsibility to make sure that you can get to this particular databasing tool. Second, I want to forewarn you that this is also the absolutely most difficult part of the course. So that being said, make sure to very, very carefully follow the step-by-step techniques that are in the book, as Access is very different than the other three platforms that we will cover in the course, as it is very restrictive in the things that you can do in the order in which you do them. So if you happen to skip a step, oftentimes you'll find that you get blocked and you have to go backwards. So in that approach, make sure that you're following very carefully in the textbook. Don't skip steps. And oftentimes if you get to a point where you come up against a roadblock, work backwards a little bit to figure out what you've missed and then work forward. It is very picky on how you set up a database. So those are a couple of real important tips that I wanted to get out of the way to begin with. As you see on the screen, I've started a sample Access database here. And it's important to think about what is the role of a database and what do we use it for? It goes kind of without saying what you do with Word. It's a word processing program that you utilize to publish documents. It goes without saying to what we use PowerPoint for presentations. Access and databasing is a little bit more behind the scenes in terms of what you will normally use. But if we think about which one of the four that we're going to cover programs through the semester, Access is and databases are probably the most utilized of the four platforms that we're going to discuss in the course. You encounter a database all the time. Your phone, in terms of its contacts in the phone book or in the contact list in your phone, is the database. When you go to the store and you pick up bread and milk and eggs and peanut butter and jelly and maybe a quart of oil, and they go across the barcode scanner when you check out, those items are all linked to a database that is linked to the price of those particular items, and you encounter a database there. Our student record system here, for example, is also a database, all triggered by your student identification number. So databasing is actually very integrated in our daily lives in terms of usage rate. So it's important to kind of think about what it will do for you. Databasing is simply meant to put a bunch of information in and then be able to glean and sort through that information. It does very little actual analysis. That's what Excel is for. And we'll get to that in the next unit. So I want to caution you in terms of what Access is actually used for and the databasing tools that are out there. Now, we're going to teach you just some of the basics and how a database works, so that you know what tools are there and how they work. We're not going to get into very many advanced things in Access, not in this course. In terms of in agriculture, you would utilize these, for example, in a lot of your farm management programs like My John Deere or Ag Leader. A lot of those are set up on databases. So it's important to understand how these things work so that you can get the information out of them. And it's also critical to point out that in terms of doing this out in the industry, you're probably going to buy a database that's already packaged that you just have to put the information in, rather than do something like we're going to try here in the class and create your own database, unless you just are really into something like that. So let's get to the content. Critical thing to point out when you start a brand new database or a blank database, it's going to ask you for the file name that oftentimes we don't do until we've already started a new project. It'll ask you for a file name up front. And Access saves the information that you put into a database actively as you're doing it. So it's constantly saving. A little bit different than as if you were creating a Word document that doesn't save quite as often, or Excel, or so on and so forth, that you could really get all the way through the document or the file before you actually give it a file name. In Access, you're going to do that right up front. Okay, as we move forward, to give you a little bit of the lay of the land here. So each of these rows that you see here, and I've started kind of an example one, each of these rows is what we call a record. And so I've set up just a basic ag student database, just something for us to talk about here. And so each row is a record, and each record would correspond with a student, beginning with their student ID. And then I've put a few other things in here to give us something to look at. Each column is known as a field. So we have the student ID field, the first name field, the last name field, so on and so forth. And each of these, an individual piece of information would be entered in. All databases have to have what we call a primary ID or unique identifier. So here at the college, your unique identifier is your student identification number. Now, the reason it's not last name is because we could potentially have 4 or 5 Heinzmans in the system. How do we sort out which one is which? Well, you could sort by Heinzman and you would get all of them. If we wanted to find specifically myself, I have a student identification number or employee identification number. We can sort by that student ID and find them. That way we don't have duplicate records on top of one another. So every record must have a unique identifier. In your phone book, that is kind of behind the scenes, and most often by the phone number specific to that name. But there's kind of a behind the scenes automatic identification number that your phone generates every time that you put in a new contact. At the store, it's the barcode. That's a unique identifier for every product. So you must define that. And this view that you see right here is called Datasheet View and looks a lot like an Excel spreadsheet. And if you go up here to the left, you'll toggle between Datasheet View, which is the default, and Design View. And this is where you kind of design your spreadsheet. And up to the left here in the student ID record area or field name, you'll see this golden key that you set that student ID as the primary identifier, the unique identifier primary key. We could change that if we wanted to say last name. We could move it down there if we wanted to, but it makes the most sense that you would have a unique identifier in that regard. Now, when you name these fields, they keep it very brief, abbreviate as often as possible. They'll only allow you to go 64 characters wide. You're also going to identify the data type. So I left the student ID as an automatically generated number. You could set it to whatever you like, and the projects that you will do will help you through that. But there's all kinds of options here. Access kind of predicts what you're going to enter. So for address, it's calculated as short, or it's set at short text, but you could make it long text. You could make it a date and time if you wanted to put a date and time in a field, and all kinds of other things that are here. If you're going to do any calculation, it certainly needs to be a number or a currency in order to do some calculations, for example, if you were, again, at the store. So make sure that you're careful in what you name them. Pay very close attention to what's in the textbook in terms of naming things. So this design view is only going to be utilized whenever you create tables or modify the structure of a current table. So it's a very specific place for database design. And then Datasheet View, if we switch back to that, this is where all the entry would typically happen. You can size these columns. We could click and drag these things and make those columns wider if we want, so that you can see everything a lot more easily. And so there's a lot of things that you can do in terms of formatting the data, the spreadsheet or database just right here on this particular screen. Okay, now obviously once we get information put in, that's only half of the picture when we talk about utilizing databasing as a tool and Access specifically. Querying that data or gleaning data out is really the functional part of Access that is really how you get some value out of it. So, for example, if I had entered all the students that we've ever had over the last 16 years that I've been at Kaskaskia College, I could put them all in here, and then I could go and query or ask Access to pull out all of the students I've ever had that graduated from Bree Central High School, or pull out all the students that I've ever had that graduated with a degree in animal science. And I could create then a list of those for me to then take some action on, whether I wanted to send them a mailer or if I wanted to send them a job opportunity that I had, something of that nature. I would have that information that I've put in the database, and I could then glean that back out so that I can utilize that information in some form or fashion. You'll be practicing a few of those things as you go through these few assignments that we're going to have in this Access section. I will remind you, as kind of a side note to that, is a lot of the assignments that you will do here in the Access section are all tied together using the same file. So make sure you keep good track of where that's at. Lastly, Access has a couple tools that it will help you create forms. Maybe you don't want to enter information in this regard. You can have like what looks like a postcard form that looks a little bit more intriguing that you could quickly enter information in. Access may have you play with that a little bit here. Also, create a report. Maybe you needed to, again, pull that information out about those students that graduated from Nashville High School, and you could create a report that you needed to include somewhere as to who those students were and maybe where they currently live, something of that regard. So Access gives you the opportunity to do a bunch of those things. So that's just the basics of Access. And again, I will encourage you to be very patient as you work through the Access assignments. Please don't hesitate to stop and ask for help. I will warn you that picking up and trying to troubleshoot problems while you're going through Access is the hardest of the 4 ones for me to help you with sometimes, because I kind of have to figure out where you are, where you went wrong, and how we go backwards to get to where you need to fix it. So be patient with yourself and be patient with me and be patient with Access as we go through. As always, if you need assistance, please catch me in our face-to-face sections or you're online. Send me an email, post in the Ask the Instructor discussion forum, shoot me a phone call, a text message, whatever it needs for me to help you out. Hopefully this video provides you with some good tips on getting through Access successfully. Thanks for tuning in.